Welcome to the Women in Industry podcast. My name is Kirsty Davies-Chinnock, and today I'm joined by Deeksha Sampath. Deeksha is a technology transfer engineer in sustainability and materials at WMG, Warwick Manufacturing Group, and WMG is an applied research and education department at the University of Warwick, and they're bridging the gap between academia and the public and private sectors, driving innovation across science, technology, and engineering. So, welcome, Deeksha. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, how did you get into engineering? Because from what I can see from your LinkedIn profile, you're an in-plant trainee at Hindustan Aeronautics in India. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yes. Yeah.
How did you get there?
Well, that's an interesting story because I've always loved engineering, I think. When I was younger, so my grandfather was an engineer as well, and my dad gave me this big, bright, shiny book. It was called A Short History of Nearly Everything. It was by Bill Bryson. I'm not sure if anyone's read it, but
I've read it. It's brilliant.
Yes, I know. I was so fascinated by it, especially the parts where they talk about the space and all the planets and everything. So I was intrigued by it from a young age. And then my grandfather did the mistake of bringing me Lego. It wasn't very popular back in India at the time, but he got me Lego and I started building things. And I was like, science. And then we've got Legos. I like hands on stuff and combine it, and you've got engineering. So I was like, that's the way to go. So yeah, and then once I realized that's the career path I wanted to choose, I went on to work at different public sector undertakings like Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. And if I remember correctly, they're one of the largest and oldest manufacturers for aerospace and defense in India. And I think they started building their first aircraft in 1942 around. And it was really interesting because we had a delegate come to my university and talk about it. And that's when I knew that I wanted to go and, experiment and see if I like it.
I hope you still build things with Lego now as well.
Yes, I've got a lot of minifigures.
It's Lego is suitable for everyone, whatever their age.
Absolutely.
I still do like a good Lego set. I really do.
Yeah.
So you sort of started off doing some work, pretty much in aviation, in engineering side of aviation. But you've also worked in nuclear and aerospace and steel industries in India, and this was extensive training. How did having these experiences at different companies within the sort of engineering supply chain, if you like, how did you find out what it was you wanted to do? Did you sort of decide to specialise, or what did you get from this sort of multidisciplinary process?
Yeah, so I think the best way to answer that question is impact. When I worked in these industries, I looked at the difference that these projects were making to different stakeholders, even small companies, even people at an individual level. And I saw the power that engineering can bring. And you're quite right. I think the reason I sort of dabbled in these kind of different industries is because I wanted to find out what I liked. And I think that's why I'd say I'm in manufacturing, because one thing that's there across all industries is manufacturing. And it's just stemming from the fact that when I was younger, I liked to build things, make things, and manufacturing is essentially making things. And so that's why doubling in these different industries kind of gave me perspective. So for example, in Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, I worked in the engine division. But then I realized I had a great interest in material science, because without the material, you're not going to be able to build these big complex machines. So I worked with composites, with aluminium. There was a lot of non-destructive testing going on. And the first time I got recruited, I remember going into this big room, and they had these tanks with fluorescent dyes, and they dip big metal parts into it to look at the components if they have cracks or anything like that. And I was like, wow, that is really cool. So I think when I was in Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, I think I pretty much figured out that I liked material science. But I just wanted to do the nuclear and steel industries just to get an overall perspective on what different industries look like.
And they're interlinked, aren't they? Obviously,
Yeah.
Manufacturing, whether it's aeroplane engines or
Yeah.
this microphone I'm talking into,
Yeah.
that they all use materials.
Yeah.
And the metal sector, whether it's aluminium, stainless steel, duplex materials, or even other materials that are composites, nothing can be made, as you rightly say, without
Yeah.
materials
Yeah.
themselves.
Absolutely.
And being a stainless steel and aluminium girl, right
Hmm.
with you on that. It's and when it comes to materials,
Yeah.
there is obviously a real need for materials to be more sustainable.
Yeah.
And that might be through producing it with less CO2. It might be through changing from one material to another because it's lighter,
Yeah.
particularly in transport and aviation.
Yeah.
It might be swapping to something like a high grade stainless steel because there is at the moment no end of life because the material's too new to have had a measured end of life at the moment.
Yeah.
Is part of the sustainability of the material something you're working on as well?
Yes. So in my role at WMG, so I'm a technology transfer engineer, and it's exactly what it says. We have primary technologies that we develop as a research group in WMG, in the SME engagement team with experts, and it's essentially trying to see if the technology is feasible in industry. Because when you introduced WMG, you rightly said we're trying to bridge the gap between academy and industry. So any solution that we bring forward, we want to make sure that it actually is feasible to use in industry. So when I look at low carbon materials, when I look at sustainability, I have two things in my mind. Obviously, the first one is innovation, because you do need to have that innovation and making new materials. So I've, for example, worked with a few companies that are trying to make plastics out of like biopolymers and plastics out of seaweed, out of hemp, mycelium, which is from mushrooms, if I'm correct. But I'm not an expert in any of those. But I just find it so interesting that these are things that we're able to move forward in terms of innovation. And obviously, again, in terms of recycled materials, we worked on projects, for example, recycling steels, recycling different metals, and also polymers. So I think it's quite an interesting space with different things happening all the time. And obviously, regulation plays a big part in it as well. And I think with SMEs, the biggest issue is that it's a very daunting concept to move into sustainability, because they're at the back end of big companies that are already quite far ahead in their sustainability journey. So to be able to guide them to share best practices, I think that's what WMG is about. And that's what my role is about, which is why I quite enjoy it.
Preaching to the converted. SMEs always get the pointy end of the stick.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think in manufacturing, something like 75% of the manufacturing and engineering companies
Mhm.
are SMEs.
Yeah.
Might be 85%, but the majority are SMEs.
Yeah.
Now, we don't get to go to the government and go, we want to do this, give us loads of money, else
Yeah.
we're going to close down, be a bit political, we're going to close down our steelworks,
Yeah.
or we're going to offshore everything that
Yeah.
Dyson do.
Yeah.
But those are the companies that, given the grants, get given this, get given everything else.
Yeah.
And we're in the background just trundling on. Most are, we're all privately owned. So if I
Yeah.
want to go out and buy a new machine,
Yeah.
the first thing the bank manager says is, sign here, how much is your house worth? And
Yeah.
it's not quite that blunt, but since the 2008 crash, most
Yeah.
SMEs now have to give personal guarantees.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, we've got the skin in the game and we're doing it.
Yeah.
But when I'm looking to invest in something,
Yeah.
I need a return on that investment.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
it's I think a lot of it is not knowing where to start. So I
Yeah.
know WMG do webinars on
Yeah.
best practice, and people come on and talk to them. And it's a
Yeah.
good idea to sign up anyone who's listening to the WMG SME cohort. If you have a look at their website, there are lots of good online webinars that they run.
Yeah.
And just even having someone to talk to, you know, WMG do discovery calls and things like that.
Yeah.
Because we want to be sustainable, we want to be
Yeah.
here in another 30 years,
Yeah.
but we can't always do the right thing
Yeah.
that perhaps people think we should be doing,
Yeah.
because we don't know about it. No one's told us about it. The law's going
Yeah.
to change in 6 months anyway,
Yeah.
and we can't afford it. So I think
Yeah.
having that, bridging that gap is really, really, really useful.
Yeah.
And I know that WMG are really, really um, innovative when it comes to a lot of the things that they do.
Yeah.
But you are as well as an individual. You know, you're sort of, when you came to WMG from
Yeah.
India, you
Yeah.
were awarded an excellent scholarship, which is like the highest one they do your masters,
Yes.
which is
Yeah.
just fantastic. I know the competition for that would have been huge. So,
Yeah.
I mean, well done on achieving that. That's
Thank you.
fantastic.
Yeah.
What did you choose to focus on for your masters?
Right. So my master's was in manufacturing systems engineering, and my thesis basically culminated in hydrothermal chemical recycling of carbon fiber composites. When we talk about recycling, we only talk about, most people talk about mechanical recycling, or they talk about pyrolysis, which is what's done in most composites when there's resin burn off. So my thesis essentially focused on hydrothermal chemical recycling because, unlike other recycling methods, chemical recycling doesn't compromise on the mechanical properties of the material as much. So reuse in different applications might be easier. And also, because it was hydrothermal, it was basically using water at critical temperatures, and using catalysts, maybe H2SO4 or different types of catalysts. So it's not something that's, a really difficult thing to find. You have to go to Iceland to find it. No, it's just water at critical temperature. So I think what fascinated me about the whole thing was the fact that there's already some lab-based tests. And one of the things that I worked on is to see if we can scale that model up and if that's something that we can do in the UK. Because obviously composites recycling, because they're a high-performing material, is really important to continue having lightweight materials like composites. But when it comes to the end of life, there's not too much that we can do yet. So that's essentially what my thesis focused on. And I think it moved a little bit away from what exactly manufacturing systems engineering is, but I still think that it was a really good starting point to my career. And I think it gave some good background and understanding of where the industry is.
That sounds really interesting, particularly with the lab tests that you've done, if you're looking to scale up,
Yeah.
because that would be very interesting if that could be done within the UK.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I love the way you say it's sort of moved away from what you started off. But
Yeah.
that's the whole point of research and development, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um, you're not going to go, I'm going to develop this, because you have to make mistakes along the way. You have to learn
Yeah.
from them. You
Yeah.
might go left instead of going right. So
True.
it's what you learn and develop,
Yeah.
getting from
And
point A to B.
yeah, and I'm quite happy I took that opportunity because I planned everything back in India. I was like, oh, I'm gonna go do my master's. I wanted more exposure, but when I still remember I was up till 1 or 2 writing my scholarship essay, and I was like, I really need to get this scholarship so I can actually go and explore. And I sent it off diligently. But this was around COVID, so when I got the scholarship notification, obviously I was ecstatic. But because it was COVID, I wasn't so sure if I wanted to move away. So I remember writing to the scholarship committee and asking them, can I defer my admission? And they were like, you can defer your admission, but you will lose your scholarship, which is rightly so. You can't carry your scholarship over to the next year. So it was a really difficult decision to make, but I'm quite happy I took that decision because I think it contributed a lot to who I am as a person as well.
And it's a difficult decision to make, to move halfway around the world.
Yeah.
My son was in Australia over COVID, and he'd gone travelling and basically got stuck.
Mhm.
But he met his now wife,
Oh, yeah.
and she'd gone to Melbourne from China to
Yeah.
do her masters, and then they now both live in the UK, which is great for me. Not really for her mum and dad, but great for me.
Yeah.
But when you got the scholarship, you mentioned your grandfather was an engineer, and you
Yeah.
mentioned that your dad got you the Lego
Yeah.
as well. How did they feel?
They were really, really happy. I don't know any other way to put it. So when I was younger, my dad and I used to play this game where we used to count. So he used to take me on a drive, and then we used to count cars, and then we used to compare the makes and models of the car. And I think as soon as I got my scholarship news, he took me out on a drive to get ice cream because I love ice cream, and it's hot in India at all times mostly, so it's always good to get an ice cream. And we played the same game, counting cars and doing that kind of stuff. So it was a really nice. It felt like a full circle.
That's lovely, and it's nice that sort of got the generation supporting each other in engineering as well,
Yeah.
which is wonderful.
Yeah.
One of the things I think we all want to do, isn't it, is we want to make our parents and our grandparents proud of what we achieve.
Yeah.
And I think getting the scholarship, getting the masters, um, and then obviously staying at WMG
Yeah.
must make them very proud indeed.
Yeah.
It's very exciting what you're looking to do at WMG, because in your current role, you're working with SMEs about net zero manufacturing.
Yeah.
So, and we've touched on that a bit, but can you give me some examples of what sort of energy saving or changes in material transfer or something like that you've helped the SMEs that you work with?
Right. So in terms of the offering we have, so we do have the Net Zero Innovation Network, which is what we started because we realized that SMEs might struggle with sustainability. So one side of what we do is basically we have these collaboration workshops where we share best practices and knowledge with SMEs on circular economy, life cycle assessments, energy savings. And it's quite nice because we get 8 to 10 SMEs. They sign up for the cohort, they come together and interact. And you get ideas even when you interact, so it's not just about what we share, we get to learn from them as well. So I think part of that, we also offer the projects, and some of the projects that I've been involved in have been really incredible. It's always to do with it's not always to do with diverting from landfill. One of my colleagues used to say that if you look at any project from a net zero lens, it can be a net zero project, and I think she's very right in saying that. So we've done waste heat recovery projects previously. So obviously, metal making, stainless steel, and all these companies, drop forgers, they all have furnaces, which are quite energy intensive. So looking at waste heat recovery is one of the things. So can we take the heat that's dissipated from above these furnaces, repurpose it, maybe make it energy again, or send it to a different so for example, in this case they sent it to a drying room, and I think in terms of the carbon that they saved from removing the dryers and just repurposing this, it was about 3,000 4,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that's one of the things. again, speaking about regulations, we worked with a company where they are working in the aerospace and defense industry, but they make paint coatings. So essentially, there were some toxic chemicals which were phased out by the EU REACH legislation. So one of the things that we did is we had a look at their coating, we did some testing, and we gave them advice on how their new coating without the toxic chemicals can also perform to British standard. So I think there's some of them, they're all very different from each other, but they're all very relevant. And when you look at a project if you look at a project from a sustainability lens, you are going to find that impact. The other thing that I can remember is also one of those projects that had a lot of waste from the NHS, gowns and all masks that weren't sold post-COVID. And, we kind of made a project where we can reuse that waste and make it into plastic pellets. And, that's probably saved thousands of tons of carbon dioxide. It would have just gone to landfill. So some of these projects are really, really interesting to work on, because for me as well, I learn on the job sometimes, and it's quite nice to work on projects that generate impact.
The amount of tonnage that would have gone to landfill on that example you gave there on the NHS, I can't talk today, NHS,
NHS,
gowns, etc.
yeah.
It's a Friday afternoon. Would have been thousands of tons.
Thousands of tons. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's a real world positive. You used the word impact earlier. And that really is a huge impact on everything everybody's trying to do, because we're all doing it in little baby steps. But the more of those we can take, the sooner we're going to reach the end goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously for an SME, when you talk about monetary incentive as well, just having so many things lying around that you have to send to landfill, it's not very useful, because you don't make millions and you want to use your money correctly. And so for being able to generate a different revenue stream from converting that into plastics pellets or a different product or whatever, I mean, obviously there's a big overarching sustainability benefit, but also you get your money's worth, and it's so important when you're a smaller company to have that.
Definitely. Well, all companies, but particularly SMEs, cash is king. You've got to have revenue streams, and if you can diversify them, that's even better. So looking at both sustainability and materials, which is sort of your two main interests, what low carbon materials are you personally excited about for the future?
Oh, that's a good question. Trying to think. One of the previous projects I worked on, it was for a roofing company, and obviously the roofs that they were trying to change, they had bitumen roofs, which is obviously petroleum derived. So when I was doing my desk-based research, I found mycelium, which I mentioned previously as well. So it's extracted from mushrooms, and I mean, people make vegan leather with it, but I mean, we've not yet realized its full potential. I think it can also be used for insulation. So instead of polyurethane, I think you can use mycelium and things like that. So I'd say biopolymers are quite interesting for me to see where we go, because these are things that we already have on the planet. Obviously, if we responsibly farm them, these are things that we can use. So that's quite interesting, the biopolymer space. And obviously, in terms of recycled materials, because my thesis solely focused on recycled composites, I wouldn't say it's low carbon just yet, but just the innovation, or doing more research to find out if we can make it circular, make composite supply chain more circular. I think that would be a big game changer for many industries as well.
I don't know which one I think is more exciting. I think possibly the biopolymers. I think that's
Yeah.
I remember getting excited the first time
Yeah.
I had a notebook that had been made from recycled something.
Oh,
It's
yes.
20 years ago, and I was like, wow, that's amazing.
I
But I
know.
think biopolymers, I think there's a lot
Yeah.
that
Um, I, th-
could
I
just be so amazing.
Absolutely. And I think in London, I was visiting my friend the other day, and I think they've started making packaging out of seaweed. And
Yeah, they
I'd
have.
ordered, yeah, and I ordered food on Uber Eats, and I was just doing my normal thing until I saw that big box which said, "Oh, this is recycled packaging," and I was like, "Oh, what is this?" And seaweed, and I was like, "I can't believe this. This is incredible." So yeah, I agree.
We, uh, we're at the UK Metals Expo this year, and
Oh,
we were last year and the year before.
hmm.
And we have what look like plastic carrier bags
Yeah.
for people to take their sample cards and goodies away in, and it's made out of sugar cane.
Oh, wow.
I know.
That is so
So
cool.
because they look like plastic bags, we just like,
Yeah.
it's not plastic, it's sugar cane. We're not killing it, biodegrades. We're not killing the planet, it
Yeah.
biodegrades.
Oh, that is so cool.
I
Yeah.
know, we thought that was quite cool. So finally, Deeksha,
Yeah.
what's the best advice you've ever received?
Hmm. I think I've got two. One that I've received and one that I've picked up. So the one that I received was from my grandfather. Well, he's not given it directly to me. He's given it to my mom, and then it's passed on. So you can say it's passed on to generations. But he said, no matter what you do in life, make sure that you give it your best shot. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're doing a really highly skilled job, you're doing a menial job, you're doing whatever job, whatever it is, always give it your best shot. So I think I've kind of incorporated that in life, and I always finish what I start, and I always try to give it my best. So that's definitely one of the best advice. But I recently also attended a conference, and I think it was more for women in the industry as well. And I think I saw this quote which they reiterated, which is, if you don't get a seat at the table, bring your own folding chair. I think that was said by a US Congresswoman as well. She was the first Black Congresswoman, Shirley. But I absolutely love that, because in life, you may not always get opportunities. You'll have to take them. And I think that was a really nice way of putting it.
That is a lovely way of putting it. I've heard that quote before. I think
Yeah.
it's really good.
Yeah.
There is another one that if you're a bit older and a bit feistier, if the door closes in your face, smash the window.
Oh, love that. That's it.
So,
Yeah.
which is right. They're both really good pieces of advice. And I love the way your grandfather sort of said, doesn't matter what the role is,
Yeah.
everybody has different roles.
Yeah.
Nobody's more important than anybody else.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We just all have different tasks to fulfill to all work together.
Yeah.
And finally, I have to congratulate you because you have been named as one of the top 50 women in engineering by the Women in Engineering Society. So very, very many congratulations.
Oh,
I
thank you.
know that a lot of people are nominated each year for that. So again, I can't wait to see what you achieve over the next couple of years. I think you're going to have an absolutely fascinating and impactful career.
Thank you, Kirsty. That means a lot.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Deeksha.